Gasping for air, Penelope pressed her ample frame against the cold marble wall of the hallway. Footsteps echoed loudly across the polished floorboards. A heavy silver Smith & Wesson gleamed in the dim lighting, clutched by a man who was supposed to be nothing more than a chauffeur. Just moments earlier, Penelope had been smoothing out a wrinkle in a silk brioni tie, whispering a frantic warning into the ear of Chicago's most feared syndicate boss. Now bullets were about to fly. In a world of tailored suits and hidden daggers, a plus-sized housekeeper had just become the only shield standing between a criminal empire and total collapse. Penelope Gallagher understood the profound tactical advantage of being invisible. Society had long ago decided that a fat woman in a maid's uniform was entirely devoid of consequence. Carrying an extra 70 pounds on her short, soft frame, Penelope possessed a round face, thick thighs, and a gentle silhouette that made arrogant men look right past her. To the dangerous, high-rolling inhabitants of the sprawling Highland Park estate, she was not a person. She was merely an extension of the feather duster, a piece of the plush background furniture meant to keep the Fretter linens crisp and the baccarat crystals sparkling. Garnett Costanza, the owner of the estate and the ruthless head of the Chicago syndicate, employed a small army of staff. His mansion was a fortress masquerading as an architectural masterpiece. Security cameras were tucked neatly behind imported Italian moldings, and men with bulging suit jackets patrolled the manicured gardens. Garnett was a man carved from cold marble and sharp edges. Whenever he walked into a room, the air pressure seemed to drop. Tall, broad-shouldered, and perpetually cloaked in custom, Tom Ford suits, Garnett carried the weight of a violent underworld on his shoulders with terrifying grace. For nearly 2 years, Penelope had cleaned his personal quarters. She knew his habits intimately. She knew that he preferred his Scotch neat, specifically Macallan, 25 poured into a heavy glass that he would leave near the balcony doors. She knew he suffered from insomnia, evidenced by the crumpled sheets on the left side of his California king bed. Above all, she knew that Garnett Costanza trusted absolutely no one. Not his bodyguards, not his accountants, and certainly not his ambitious underboss Lorenzo. Lorenzo was a snake wrapped in expensive cashmere. Penelope had noticed it months ago, while vacuuming the Persian rugs in the billiards room, her heavy form blending into the shadowed corner. She had watched Lorenzo pour drinks for the other lieutenants. His smiles never reached his eyes. He spoke of Garnett with an overly rehearsed reverence that set Penelope's teeth on edge. But Penelope kept her mouth shut. She was just the chubby maid who made sure the bathrooms smelled like fresh eucalyptus and the marble floors were buffed to a mirror shine. Her survival depended on her silence. Living in the background gave Penelope a unique education in the mechanics of power. She learned to read the micro-expressions of hardened killers. She could tell when a deal had gone sour by the angle at which Garnett threw his keys onto the credenza. She knew when a hit had been ordered by the absolute deafening silence that enveloped the house in the early hours of the morning. Despite the darkness of his world, Penelope harbored a quiet, deeply buried fascination with Garnett. He was terrifying, yes, but there was a quiet honor in the way he treated his staff. Unlike Lorenzo, who once snapped his fingers at Penelope and called her dumpling when demanding a fresh ashtray, Garnett always used her name. He would nod politely when he passed her in the hallways. Once, when she had dropped a stack of heavy towels, he had paused, actually stooping to help her retrieve them, his dark eyes meeting hers for a fleeting second. That brief moment of proximity, the scent of his sandalwood cologne, the heat radiating from his large frame, had left Penelope's heart hammering against her ribs for hours. However, Penelope harbored no delusions. She was a realist. Women who looked like her soft, heavy, and decidedly ordinary did not factor into the romantic equations of men like Garnett Costanza. He dated runway models, European heiresses and actresses with razor-sharp cheekbones. Penelope's domain was the laundry room and the cleaning supply closet. Thursday morning arrived with a heavy, suffocating humidity that signaled a coming storm. The estate was buzzing with a frantic, nervous energy. Garnett was scheduled to attend a major sit-down with a rival faction from New York at a secure location downtown. It was a meeting that would define the territory lines for the next decade. The stakes were astronomical, and the tension in the mansion was palpable. Penelope was tasked with preparing Garnett's dressing room. Her plump fingers meticulously arranged his silver cufflinks, ensuring the heavy Rolex Daytona was polished and resting in its velvet case. She hummed softly, a nervous habit, as she checked the alignment of his shoes. The massive windows of the dressing room overlooked the grand driveway, where Garnett's armored Maybach S-Class was being detailed. Wiping down the windowsill, Penelope glanced outside. Down below the usual head of transportation, a burly, jovial man named Dominic was nowhere to be seen. Instead, a newer driver named Thomas was pacing near the front bumper of the Maybach. Thomas had only been on the payroll for 3 weeks. He was lean, jittery, and had a habit of avoiding eye contact. Penelope paused, her dusting her brow, furrowing. Something about Thomas's body language was wrong. His shoulders were hiked up to his ears, and he kept glancing nervously toward the wrought-iron security gates. Penelope stepped closer to the glass, hiding her large frame behind the heavy velvet drapes. She watched as Thomas pulled a black burner phone from his pocket. He dialed a number, cupping his hand over his mouth as he spoke. Penelope couldn't hear the words, but the frantic, jerky nods of his head painted a clear picture of panic. Then Thomas did something that made Penelope's blood run ice cold. He ended the call, looked around the empty driveway, and reached into the deep pocket of his driver's coat. He pulled out a sleek, black Glock 19. It wasn't the gun itself that shocked Penelope. Guns were as common as umbrellas in this house. It was what he did next. Thomas screwed a long, cylindrical suppressor onto the barrel. Drivers in Garnett's syndicate were strictly forbidden from carrying suppressed weapons. Their job was defense and evasion, not silent assassination. Moving with practiced, terrifying speed, Thomas opened the driver's side door of the Maybach and slid the suppressed weapon beneath the floor mat, directly under where his feet would rest. He then smoothed out his suit jacket, took a deep breath, and stood at attention by the rear passenger door waiting for his boss. Penelope backed away from the window, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps. A suppressed weapon, hidden by the driver. A replacement driver on the day of the biggest meeting of Garnett's life. The math was simple, and the sum was devastating. It was a hit, an inside job. Panic threatened to paralyze her. What was she supposed to do? Call security? The head of security was downstairs, possibly in on it. Tell Dante Garnett's personal bodyguard. Dante was currently scanning the perimeter. Penelope looked down at her own trembling, chubby hands. She was just the maid. If she was wrong, or if she accused the wrong person, she could end up at the bottom of the Chicago River. It wasn't her business. She was paid to clean, not to play hero. But as the image of Garnett, the man who had kindly helped her pick up those dropped towels, the man who was currently walking into a death trap, flashed in her mind. Penelope made a choice. She wiped her sweaty palms on her apron, took a deep, shuddering breath, and turned toward the master bedroom. Stepping into the master suite felt like crossing into a different realm. The heavy mahogany doors clicked shut behind Penelope, sealing her inside the quiet, opulent space. Garnett stood in the center of the expansive dressing area, staring into a floor-to-ceiling mirror. He was already dressed in a crisp white dress shirt and tailored charcoal trousers, the very picture of lethal elegance. A custom Xenia silk tie hung loosely around his neck. For a man who orchestrated complex illegal empires with ruthless precision, Garnett was currently locked in a frustrating battle with a simple Windsor knot. His jaw was clenched tight, the muscles ticking in his cheeks as he aggressively looped the silk fabric, only for it to fall lopsided against his collar. Penelope stood frozen by the doorway, her ample chest heaving. The silence in the room was thick, broken only by the sharp rustle of the silk tie. She needed to speak. She needed to warn him. But the words were lodged in her throat, trapped beneath layers of conditioned subservience and sheer terror. Garnett finally noticed her in the reflection of the mirror. His dark, piercing eyes locked onto hers. He didn't look angry, just mildly surprised to see her standing there, wringing her apron. "Penelope," Garnett said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that vibrated in the quiet room. "Is there something wrong with the room?" "No, Mr. Costanza," she squeaked, hating how high and fragile her voice sounded. She cleared her throat, forcing herself to stand taller, ignoring the way her soft stomach pressed against the waistband of her uniform. "The room is fine," Garnett grunted, returning his attention to the mirror. He yanked the tie loose and started over. "Good. Because I have a headache that could split a cinder block, and this damned piece of fabric is refusing to cooperate." He sighed, dropping his hands. "Dominic usually helps me with this when I'm running late, but he called in sick. Stomach bug." Penelope's stomach churned at the mention of the missing driver. It wasn't a stomach bug. It was a coordinated removal. I can help you, sir." Penelope offered, the words tumbling out of her mouth before she could stop them. Garnett paused, turning to fully face her. He looked down at her, taking in her flushed, round cheeks, her trembling hands, and the nervous way she shifted her weight. For a long second, Penelope was certain he was going to dismiss her to tell the fat little maid to get back to scrubbing floors. Instead, he let out a short, resigned breath and took a step toward her. "Be my guest, Penelope. If you can tame this thing, I'll double your Christmas bonus." Penelope stepped forward, her legs feeling like lead. She stopped just inches from him. He was a towering figure, radiating a dangerous masculine heat. She had to tilt her head back to look at his face. Up close, she could see the faint shadow of stubble along his jawline and the tiny silver scar cutting through his left eyebrow. The scent of Tom Ford, rich with tobacco and vanilla, enveloped her senses. She raised her trembling hands. Her plump, soft fingers brushed against the crisp collar of his shirt. Garnett went perfectly still. He wasn't used to people touching him so casually, especially not with such hesitant, gentle movements. Penelope grabbed the ends of the silk tie. She had tied her late father's ties 100 times for church, but her hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip the fabric. "Breathe, Penelope," Garnett murmured softly, his eyes dropping to watch her hands. "It's just a tie. I don't bite." He doesn't know, she thought wildly. He has no idea he's about to walk into a coffin. Penelope forced herself to focus. She crossed the wide end over the narrow end, bringing it up and through the loop. As she worked the fabric, she leaned in closer. Her soft chest brushed against his solid chest. She could feel the steady, powerful rhythm of his heartbeat beneath the white cotton. It was a strong, rhythmic thumping that she realized would stop entirely if she didn't speak up right now. She formed the front loop of the knot, her face mere inches from his neck. She didn't look up at his eyes. She couldn't. If she looked at him, she would lose her nerve entirely. "Mr. Costanza," she whispered, her voice so low it was barely a breath against his collar. "Yes," he replied, his tone remaining calm, though she felt the muscles in his chest tightened slightly at her conspiratorial tone. Penelope pulled the wide end of the tie down through the loop, tightening the knot flawlessly against his collarbone. She smoothed her thumbs over the pristine silk, pressing her hands flat against his chest for just a fraction of a second. "Your driver has a gun," she whispered rapidly, her words bleeding together in her terror. "A Glock with a silencer. He hid it under his floor mat. Don't get in the car." Garnett's entire body went rigid. The warmth she had felt radiating from him vanished, replaced instantly by the cold, calculated stillness of a predator. He didn't gasp. He didn't jerk away. The only indication that he had heard her was the sudden, terrifying darkening of his eyes and the absolute cessation of his breathing. Penelope immediately dropped her hands and took a large step back. Her head bowed submissively, playing the part of the dutiful maid who had just finished her task. "All done, sir," she said aloud, her voice shaking only slightly. Garnett stared at her. His gaze was like a physical weight pinning her to the floorboards. He was a human lie detector, a man who had survived assassins, federal indictments, and rival gangs by reading the microscopic tells of deception. He stared at Penelope's round, terrified face. He saw the genuine fear in her eyes, the sweat beading on her forehead, the way her soft hands were twisted in the fabric of her apron. She wasn't lying. She had absolutely nothing to gain by lying and everything to lose. Garnett slowly reached up and had adjusted the perfectly tied knot at his throat, his face smoothed out into a mask of total, terrifying indifference. "Thank you, Penelope," Garnett said, his voice returning to its normal, booming volume. "Excellent work." He walked over to the mahogany valet stand, picked up his suit jacket, and slid it over his broad shoulders. He checked his watch, the Patek Philippe gleaming against his wrist. "You should take the rest of the day off, Penelope," Garnett said, casually, not looking at her as he buttoned his jacket. "Actually, why don't you go down to the wine cellar? I need an inventory done on the Barolo vintages. Take your time. Lock the heavy steel door behind you. It gets drafty down there." Penelope's breath hitched. The wine cellar was a reinforced panic room disguised as storage. Garnett was putting her in a bunker. "Yes, Mr. Costanza," she whispered. Garnett finally looked at her again. The coldness in his eyes had retreated, slightly replaced by a fierce, burning intensity. "Go," he commanded softly. "Now." Penelope didn't hesitate. She turned and practically ran from the room, her heavy footsteps muffled by the thick hallway runners. She scrambled down the servant stairs, her heart pounding a frantic drum solo against her ribs, completely unaware of the explosive violence she had just set into motion. Garnett Costanza did not run. He never ran. He walked down the grand sweeping staircase of his mansion, with the slow, measured stride of an emperor descending from his throne. To the untrained eye, he was a businessman heading out for a crucial negotiation. To the men who truly knew him, the slight narrowing of his eyes and the rigid set of his jaw signaled an impending execution. As he reached the marble foyer, his head of security, Dante, fell into step beside him. Dante was a massive wall of muscle, fiercely loyal and highly observant. "Cars are ready, boss," Dante said, his earpiece coiled neatly behind his ear. "Thomas is waiting out front." Garnett didn't break his stride. "Dante," he murmured, his voice so low that only the large bodyguard could hear. "Thomas is a dead man walking. He's got a suppressed weapon under his floor mat." Dante didn't miss a beat. His facial expression remained completely neutral, but his right hand subtly shifted, resting just millimeters from the lapel of his jacket where his sidearm was holstered. "Understood. The play." "We play it out," Garnett replied coldly. "I want to know who is holding his leash." The heavy double doors were pulled open by two guards. The oppressive, humid air of the impending storm hit Garnett's face. The black Maybach sat idling in the circular driveway, its engine a low, powerful purr. Thomas was standing by the rear passenger door, his posture stiff. As Garnett approached, Thomas forced a tight, nervous smile and pulled the door open. Garnett stopped a few feet from the vehicle. He looked at Thomas, studying the man's twitching jaw and the sweat beading at his temples. "Thomas," Garnett said pleasantly. "Where is Dominic today?" Thomas swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Our stomach flu, Mr. Costanza. Called me in at the last minute. Is that right?" Garnett mused. He took a step closer to the car, looking into the plush leather interior. "You know, Thomas, I've always hated sitting in the back. Makes me feel old." Thomas blinked, confusion flashing across his face. "Sir, I think I'll drive today," Garnett said smoothly. He stepped forward, moving past the open rear door and heading straight for the driver's side. Panic exploded in Thomas's eyes. If Garnett got into the driver's seat, he would immediately see the hidden weapon. The entire assassination plot would unravel in seconds. Thomas reacted on pure, terrified instinct. "Mr. Costanza, you can't—" Thomas blurted out, stepping forward and reaching a hand out to block Garnett's path. It was the ultimate mistake. Before Thomas could even register what was happening, Dante moved. The massive bodyguard closed the distance in a blur of violent motion. Dante's massive hand clamped down on Thomas's throat, slamming the slender driver backward against the reinforced glass of the Maybach. Simultaneously, Dante's other hand swept beneath Thomas's jacket, disarming the driver of his secondary weapon, a standard revolver, in a fraction of a second. "Do not touch him," Dante growled, pressing his forearm against Thomas's windpipe, cutting off the man's air supply. Garnett calmly opened the driver's side door. He leaned in, reached under the thick floor mat, and pulled out the sleek, black Glock 19. The heavy suppressor made it unwieldy, a tool designed purely for quiet, close-range murder. Garnett stood up, holding the weapon loosely in his hand, and walked back over to where Dante had Thomas pinned. A suppressed Glock. "Thomas?" Garnett asked, his voice deadly quiet. "You were going to pop me before we even reached the highway, weren't you? Leave my body in the back seat and walk away." Thomas gagged, clawing uselessly at Dante's arm. "Please," he choked out. "Who gave the order?" Garnett demanded, stepping closer, the muzzle of the weapon pressing lightly against Thomas's forehead. "Give me a name and I'll let you live long enough to leave the state." Thomas squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head. "He'll kill my family." Before Garnett could apply more pressure, the sudden shrill ring of a cell phone shattered the tension. It was coming from Thomas's pocket. The burner phone. Garnett gestured with his chin. Dante reached into the driver's pocket and pulled out the cheap plastic phone. He glanced at the screen, then handed it to Garnett. The caller ID was blocked. Garnett pressed the answer button and put the phone on speaker, holding it up. "Thomas!" A voice hissed through the tiny speaker. "Is it done? Is he in the car?" Garnett felt the earth drop out from beneath his feet. He recognized that voice. He had known that voice since childhood. It was a voice he had trusted with his life, his money, and his secrets. It was Lorenzo, his underboss. A heavy, oppressive silence fell over the driveway. Garnett stared at the phone in his hand, a chilling numbness spreading through his chest. Lorenzo wasn't just planning a coup. He was actively directing Garnett's murder from afar. Garnett didn't say a word. He slowly pressed the end call button, dropping the burner phone onto the pavement. He raised his foot and crushed the device beneath the heel of his Italian leather shoe. The plastic shattered with a sharp crunch. "Dante," Garnett said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. "Yes, boss. Put Thomas in the trunk of the secondary vehicle. Secure the perimeter. Nobody leaves this estate. Nobody enters." Garnett looked up at the sky as the first heavy drops of the storm began to fall, splattering against the hood of the Maybach. "And get a strike team ready. We are paying Lorenzo a visit." As Dante dragged the whimpering driver away, Garnett stood in the driveway, letting the cold water soak into his custom suit. His empire was fracturing from the inside out. He had been minutes away from taking a bullet to the back of the head, and he owed his life entirely to a chubby, terrified housekeeper who had noticed a wrinkle in his tie. Garnett turned back toward the massive front doors of the mansion. The war had just begun, and there was one piece of collateral on the board that he needed to secure immediately. He walked back into the house, bypassing his waiting security detail, and headed straight for the basement stairs. Penelope Gallagher was in the wine cellar, and Garnett realized with a sudden fierce protectiveness that she was the only person in his entire organization he could currently trust. Descending the spiraling stone staircase, Garnett moved with a predatory silence that belied his massive frame. The subterranean level of the Highland Park mansion was a labyrinth of reinforced concrete and state-of-the-art climate control, housing a wine collection valued at over $12 million. Yet as he approached the heavy steel door of the primary cellar, Garnett's mind was entirely disconnected from his prized vintages of Domaine de la Romanée Conti and Chateau Petrus. His thoughts were consumed by the woman shivering inside. He pressed his thumb against the biometric scanner. The heavy deadbolts retracted with a mechanical thunk, and Garnett pushed the vault door open. Inside the cellar was dimly lit by warm amber sconces that cast long shadows across the endless racks of glass. The air was perpetually chilled to a crisp 55 degrees, smelling faintly of old oak cork and damp earth. Garnett stepped into the room, his eyes scanning the narrow aisles. "Penelope!" Garnett called out his voice, a low, resonant rumble that echoed off the vaulted brick ceiling. A sharp intake of breath came from the far corner, near the section reserved for Italian Reds. Garnett moved down the aisle, his footsteps muffled by the thick cork flooring. He found her huddled on the floor between two towering racks of Barolo. Penelope had pulled her knees to her chest, her arms wrapped tightly around her thick, trembling legs. Her maid's apron was crumpled, and her round, expressive face was pale with stark terror. When she saw Garnett, she flinched instinctively, pressing her soft back harder against the wooden wine rack. In her world, knowing a mob boss's secrets usually meant a swift and brutal end. Garnett immediately recognized the primal fear in her eyes. He stopped a respectful distance away, slowly crouching down so his towering height wouldn't loom over her. He rested his forearms on his knees, deliberately keeping his hands visible and relaxed. "You can breathe, Penelope," Garnett said softly, his tone gentler than anyone in his organization had ever heard. "You are completely safe. Thomas has been neutralized." Penelope let out a ragged, shaking exhale, her plump shoulders dropping a fraction of an inch. Did he? "He won't be driving anyone ever again," Garnett answered smoothly, sparing her the gruesome details. He tilted his head, studying her intensely. In the amber light, the golden undertones of her skin glowed. He noticed the rapid pulse fluttering at the base of her throat, and the way her full pink lips were parted as she struggled to catch her breath. For the first time, Garnett truly looked at her, seeing past the uniform. She was soft everywhere. His world was hard. She was genuine in an empire built entirely on deception. "Why did you do it?" Garnett asked, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "Lorenzo has eyes everywhere. If Thomas had seen you, or if I had ignored you, you would be dead right now. You risked your life for a man who barely speaks to you." Penelope swallowed hard, wrapping her chubby arms tighter around her torso to ward off the cellar's chill. She looked down at the cork floor, unable to hold his intense, burning gaze. I couldn't just watch it happen, she whispered, her voice trembling but surprisingly resolute. You aren't like the others, Mr. Costanza. Lorenzo treats the staff like we are stray dogs. But you always use my name. You helped me pick up those towels in the West Wing last month. You're a violent man, sir, I know that. But you aren't a cruel one. Garnett felt a strange, unfamiliar tightness seize his chest. You helped me pick up those towels. Such a microscopic act of basic human decency, something he had entirely forgotten, had just saved his life and his empire. He looked at her round, flushed cheeks and the soft, inviting curve of her hips pressed against the floor, feeling an unexpected jolt of deep, possessive heat. He had spent his life surrounded by women who looked like starved greyhounds, women who calculated his net worth before they even learned his middle name. This woman who carried extra weight and wore a polyester uniform possessed more loyalty and raw courage than his entire inner circle combined. You are freezing, Garnett noted, rising to his full height. He unbuttoned his custom Tom Ford suit jacket, a garment worth more than Penelope's annual salary, and slipped it off his broad shoulders. He stepped forward and gently draped the heavy silk-lined wool over her shivering shoulders. The jacket was massive on her, engulfing her plump frame, but it immediately enveloped her in his heat and the intoxicating scent of tobacco vanilla and expensive sandalwood. Penelope looked up at him, her eyes wide with shock at the intimate gesture. "Keep it on," Garnett commanded, softly offering her his large, calloused hand. "We cannot stay here. Lorenzo is under the impression that I am currently bleeding out in the back of my Maybach. He will send a sweep team to the estate to tie up loose ends, and I will not risk you being caught in the crossfire." Penelope tentatively reached out. Her small, soft hand disappeared into his massive grip. Garnett pulled her to her feet with effortless strength, pulling her just a fraction closer than strictly necessary. He didn't let go of her hand immediately, his thumb lightly brushing the soft skin of her knuckles. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice breathless. "I own a private penthouse at the Waldorf Astoria in the Gold Coast. It is strictly off the books, registered under a shell corporation in Luxembourg. Only Dante knows it exists," Garnett explained, finally releasing her hand to check the loaded magazine of his sleek Heckler & Koch USP compact, which he pulled from a shoulder holster. "You will stay there until I have sterilized the syndicate. From this moment forward, Penelope, you are no longer staff. You are under my personal, absolute protection. Do you understand?" Penelope nodded, completely overwhelmed. She pulled the lapels of his suit jacket tighter around her ample chest. She had descended into the cellar as a terrified housekeeper, but as she followed Garnett Costanza back up the stone steps, she felt the terrifying, thrilling realization that her life would never, ever be the same. Bavette's Bar and Boeuf hummed with the quiet, expensive murmur of Chicago's political and criminal elite. Located in the River North district, the dimly lit, jazz-infused steakhouse was famous for its heavy velvet curtains, crystal chandeliers, and discreet subterranean dining rooms that offered absolute privacy. Inside the most exclusive VIP room, hidden behind a solid oak door at the end of a brick corridor, Lorenzo was holding court. The underboss looked the part of a newly crowned king. He wore a flawless three-piece Brioni suit, a silk pocket square tucked perfectly into his breast pocket, and a self-satisfied smirk that stretched from ear to ear. Sitting across from him were two men of immense, dangerous influence. To his left sat Arthur Pendleton, a notoriously corrupt Chicago city alderman who controlled the zoning permits for the city's lucrative port developments. To his right sat Carmine Rossetti, a high-ranking capo from the Lucchese crime family in New York, sent to broker a new era of cooperation. Lorenzo raised a crystal tumbler filled with Pappy Van Winkle bourbon, the golden liquid catching the flickering light of the candelabra. To a new, more profitable future, Lorenzo declared, his voice slick with arrogance. Garnet Costanza was a dinosaur. He was too rigidly tied to the old codes. He refused to open the shipping ports to your narcotics shipments, Carmine. And he refused to properly compensate you for your political cover, Arthur. But Garnet's reign ended 30 minutes ago on Interstate 94. His driver took care of the problem, and my cleanup crew is already scrubbing the Highland Park estate as we speak. Carmine, a heavily scarred man with dead reptilian eyes, clinked his glass against Lorenzo's. If Costanza is truly out of the picture, the 5 families are prepared to back your claim to the Chicago throne, Lorenzo. But there better not be any hiccups. If Costanza survived... He didn't... Lorenzo laughed, taking a deep swallow of the expensive bourbon. A suppressed glock to the base of the skull at point-blank range. It is physically impossible to survive. The king is dead, gentlemen. I am the syndicate now. The words had barely left Lorenzo's lips when the heavy oak door of the VIP room exploded inward. The heavy wood slammed against the brick wall with a deafening crack splintering the frame. Lorenzo's 2 personal bodyguards, stationed near the entrance, instinctively reached beneath their suit jackets. They never even cleared their holsters. 2 suppressed coughs, thwip-thwip, echoed in the confined space. Both bodyguards dropped to the floor, perfectly synchronized with neat red circles appearing in the center of their foreheads. Dante stepped over their twitching bodies, sweeping the room with the barrel of a custom SIG MCX Virtus rifle. His massive frame blocked the exit, his eyes cold and devoid of any human empathy. A heavy, suffocating silence descended over the table. Lorenzo sat frozen, his glass of bourbon suspended halfway to his mouth. All the color rapidly drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, ashen gray. Stepping out from the shadows of the hallway, Garnet Costanza walked into the VIP room. He was impeccably dressed, save for the missing suit jacket he had left wrapped around a terrified housekeeper miles away. His white dress shirt was crisp, the silk Xenia tie perfectly knotted at his throat. He looked absolutely untouched, radiating a lethal, terrifying calm that sucked all the oxygen out of the room. You started the celebration without me, Lorenzo. Garnet noted his voice, an eerie conversational baritone. I must say I'm offended. Lorenzo's hand began to shake violently. The crystal tumbler slipped from his fingers, crashing onto the hardwood floor and sending expensive bourbon splashing across his leather shoes. Garnet, I can explain. Garnet slowly walked toward the table. Alderman Pendleton pushed his chair back, his face slick with panic. Costanza, I had nothing to do with this. I swear to God, he invited me here to talk about zoning. Garnet didn't even look at the politician. He kept his dark, burning eyes locked entirely on Lorenzo. He reached the table, picked up the bottle of Pappy Van Winkle, and casually poured himself a measure in an empty glass. You sent a rat to drive my car, Lorenzo, Garnet said, taking a slow sip of the bourbon. You tried to execute me in my own vehicle on the day of a major sit-down. You broke the oath. You broke the family. Garnet, please, Lorenzo begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic whine. He pressed his back against his chair, trying to create distance. It wasn't just my idea, the New York families. Carmine. They pressured me. They said if I didn't remove you, they would wipe out our entire syndicate. Carmine. Rossetti slammed his hand on the table, glaring at Lorenzo. Shut your mouth, you sniveling coward. We don't orchestrate hits on sitting bosses. You promised us a clean transition. And you believed a traitor? Garnet asked Carmine, softly, finally turning his gaze to the New York capo. A man who betrays his own blood will inevitably betray you, Carmine. You should know better. Garnett set his glass down on the table with a sharp, definitive click. He pulled the H&K USP compact from his shoulder holster with terrifying speed, leveling it directly at Lorenzo's chest. "Wait, Garnett, wait," Lorenzo screamed, throwing his hands up to protect his face. "If you kill me, you won't know the whole truth. You think I paid for the hit myself. You think I hid the money." Garnett's finger tightened slightly on the trigger. "Speak." "It's Miller." Lorenzo sobbed, tears spilling down his cheeks. "Your chief accountant. He's been skimming from the offshore accounts for 2 years. He funded the assassination. He paid Thomas. If you kill me, he'll disappear with $40 million of the syndicate's money." Garnett absorbed this new, devastating piece of information without moving a single facial muscle. Miller, the man who managed every single clean and dirty dime the syndicate owned. The betrayal ran far deeper than a greedy underboss. The rot was at the very financial core of his empire. "Thank you for the audit, Lorenzo," Garnett said coldly. Bang! The gunshot was deafening in the small room. Garnett didn't use a suppressor. He wanted the noise. He wanted the finality of it to ring in the ears of the men sitting at the table. Lorenzo's body jerked violently backward, the chair toppling over and spilling him onto the expensive rug, dead before he hit the ground. Garnett calmly engaged the safety on his weapon and holstered it. He looked down at the shaking alderman and the stoic but visibly sweating New York capo. "Gentlemen," Garnett announced, adjusting his cuffs, "the Chicago Syndicate is currently undergoing a violent restructuring. I suggest you both return to your respective corners and stay out of my city until the blood is completely washed from the streets." Garnett turned his back on them and walked toward the door. Dante stepped aside, keeping his rifle trained on the table until Garnett was clear. "Dante," Garnett said, as they walked briskly down the brick corridor, leaving the chaos behind them. "Boss, call the Waldorf Astoria. Tell them to ensure the pantry in the penthouse is fully stocked with anything Penelope might want, and put a 4-man tactical team in the lobby." Garnett's eyes narrowed, visualizing the numbers and ledgers his accountant had meticulously guarded. "Then get my car. We are paying a visit to a very wealthy accountant." Midnight draped over the Chicago skyline like a heavy velvet shroud as Garnett's armored Cadillac Escalade pulled up to the loading dock of the St. Regis residences. This architectural marvel of glass and steel housed the city's ultra-wealthy, including Arthur Miller, the chief accountant of the Costanza Syndicate. Miller was a man who preferred spreadsheets to Smith & Wesson's, a quiet, meticulously groomed numbers genius who had spent a decade laundering Garnett's illicit revenue through legitimate shell companies and offshore trusts. Garnett stepped out of the SUV, his face an unreadable mask of cold fury. Dante flanked him silently, carrying a heavy leather breeching bag. They bypassed the grand lobby, entirely utilizing a dedicated service elevator, accessed via a cloned keycard Dante had procured from a terrified building manager just 10 minutes prior. Ascending to the 72nd floor, the elevator hummed with quiet efficiency. Garnett adjusted his cuffs, his mind calculating the exact amount of pressure required to break a man who lived behind firewalls and encryption keys. If he has already initiated the wire transfers to the Cayman accounts, the money will be fragmented across 50 different dummy corporations within the hour. Garnett stated quietly, watching the floor numbers climb on the digital display. Dante checked the action on his sidearm. "Then we don't let him hit enter." The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. They stepped into a private marble-floored vestibule. The heavy mahogany door to Miller's penthouse was locked, fortified with a biometric deadbolt and a keypad. Dante didn't bother with lockpicks. He pulled a specialized silent hydraulic spreader from the breeching bag, wedged it into the doorframe, and pumped the handle. With a sickening crunch of splintering wood and groaning metal, the reinforced frame gave way. Garnett walked into the sprawling, ultra-modern penthouse. The panoramic windows offered a breathtaking view of Navy Pier, but Garnett's eyes were locked on the frantic scene unfolding in the center of the living room. Arthur Miller was violently throwing stacks of bearer bonds and banded $100 bills into a titanium Rimowa suitcase. A heavy-duty shredder was whining in the corner, chewing through years of physical ledgers. On the glass dining table, 2 encrypted laptops were open, displaying the complex routing matrices of the Julius Baer Group, an exclusive Swiss private banking firm. Miller froze. The bundle of cash in his hand slipped from his manicured fingers, hitting the imported rug with a soft thud. He looked at Garnett, then at the massive, heavily armed Dante, and all the blood drained from his face. "Garnett!" Miller squeaked, his voice cracking violently. You're supposed to be dead." "Reports of my demise were greatly exaggerated, Arthur," Garnett said smoothly, casually stepping over a pile of shredded documents. He walked to the dining table and glanced at the glowing laptop screens. "Julius Baer Group. Very prestigious. Attempting to move $40 million in a single evening is ambitious even for you." Miller swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically toward the front door, though Dante's massive frame completely blocked any hope of escape. "Garnett, listen to me. I was forced. Lorenzo held a gun to my wife's head. He told me if I didn't fund the coup, he would slaughter my entire family." Garnett tilted his head, his dark eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. "Your wife has been vacationing in St. Bart's for the past 3 weeks, Arthur. Dante verified her flight records on our way over here. You weren't coerced. You got greedy. You thought you could finance a regime change, skim a fortune off the top during the chaos, and vanish into a non-extradition country." Panic seized Miller's features. He lunged toward the laptops, his hand slamming down toward the execute transfer key on the keyboard. Dante moved with terrifying speed, crossing the room and driving the butt of his pistol directly into Miller's shoulder. The accountant screamed in agony, collapsing to his knees and clutching his fractured collarbone. Garnett calmly pulled out the custom mahogany chair and sat down at the glass table, turning the laptops to face him. "Dante, secure his hands. Arthur is going to dictate his passwords to me. Every single one." "Go to hell, Costanza." Miller spat, tears of pain streaming down his face. "If I give you those codes, you'll kill me anyway. If I don't, the money vanishes into a phantom network at midnight. You lose 40 million. Garnett sighed softly, a sound of deep, profound disappointment. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the heavy, suppressed Glock 19 that he had recovered from Thomas's car just hours earlier. He placed it gently on the glass table next to the keyboards. "Arthur, I have survived an assassination attempt orchestrated by my own underboss, discovered my driver was a contracted killer, and executed 2 men in a VIP dining room at Bavette's. My patience is not just thin, it is entirely non-existent." Garnett leaned forward, his voice dropping to a terrifying, gravelly whisper. "I'm not going to ask you for the passwords. I'm going to start breaking fingers. And when you run out of fingers, Dante will start on your toes. You have 10 seconds to decide if you want to leave this room walking or in a series of highly insulated coolers." Miller stared into Garnett's dead, unblinking eyes. He saw absolutely no bluff, no hesitation, only the cold, mechanical certainty of a predator. The accountant broke instantly. Sobbing quietly, he began rattling off the alphanumeric sequences and 2-factor authentication codes. For the next 20 minutes, Garnett systematically reversed every pending wire transfer, funneling the stolen 40 million back into the syndicate's heavily guarded central accounts. He changed the master encryption keys, permanently locking Miller out of the financial empire he had helped build. Once the final confirmation screen blinked, green Garnett closed the laptops. He stood up, smoothing the front of his dress shirt. "Dante," Garnett said, turning his back on the weeping accountant. "Boss, take him to the warehouse on the south side. Have the interrogators find out exactly who else in the organization knew about this plot. When they are finished extracting every syllable of information he possesses, put him on a freighter to nowhere." Garnett walked out of the ruined penthouse, stepping back into the quiet hum of the elevator. The syndicate was bleeding, fractured, and missing key lieutenants. The next few weeks would be a brutal, bloody campaign to restore total order to the Chicago underworld. But as the elevator descended toward the street, Garnett's mind shifted entirely from ledgers and executions. His thoughts drifted to the Waldorf Astoria, to the soft, terrified woman wearing his oversized suit jacket, hiding in a penthouse she didn't belong in simply because she had been brave enough to warn a monster that the cage was rigged. Penelope Gallagher felt as though she had been dropped onto the surface of an alien planet. The penthouse suite at the Waldorf Astoria was a masterclass in aggressive, unapologetic luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered an unobstructed view of Lake Michigan, reflecting the glittering city lights across the dark water. The furniture was imported Italian leather, the floors were heated marble, and a massive crystal chandelier hung suspended over a grand piano in the corner. She stood in the center of the vast living room, feeling entirely out of place in her rumpled, polyblend maid's uniform. She had kept Garnett's heavy suit jacket wrapped tightly around her shoulders, finding a strange, desperate comfort in the scent of his cologne, lingering on the fabric. The past 6 hours had been a blur of sheer terror and disbelief. She had been escorted here by a team of heavily armed silent men in black suits who had respectfully addressed her as "Ma'am" before taking up positions outside the mahogany double doors. Penelope had paced the length of the penthouse until her thick thighs ached her mind, replaying the image of the hidden Glock over and over. Was Garnett dead? Had her warning been too late? The soft click of the heavy door unlocking sent a violent jolt of adrenaline through her veins. Penelope spun around her hands instinctively, clutching the lapels of the suit jacket. The door swung open, and Garnett Costanza stepped into the soft, ambient light of the foyer. He looked exhausted. His tie was missing, the top 3 buttons of his crisp white shirt were undone, and a faint smear of what looked suspiciously like blood stained the edge of his left cuff. But he was alive. He was breathing. He was here. Garnett locked the deadbolt behind him and turned to face her. The hard, predatory lines of his face instantly softened the moment his dark eyes locked onto her round, anxious form. He let out a long, heavy sigh, the tension visibly draining from his massive shoulders. "You're safe," Penelope whispered, the words tumbling out as a desperate, tearful gasp. Garnett walked slowly toward her, stopping just a few feet away. "Thanks to you, Penelope. I am. The threats have been permanently neutralized. Lorenzo and Miller will never pose a danger to anyone ever again." Penelope shuddered at the finality in his tone, but she didn't look away. She had known who he was when she tied his knot this morning. She accepted the darkness that cloaked him. "I didn't know what to do," she admitted, looking down at her scuffed, practical work shoes. I'm just the maid. I'm nobody. I was so scared I was wrong." "Look at me, Penelope," Garnett commanded softly. She hesitated, then slowly tilted her head up. His dark eyes were burning with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "You are not a nobody." Garnett said, his voice a deep, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate in her very bones. Every single hardened killer, highly paid security expert, and trusted advisor in my empire failed me today. The men who swore blood oaths to protect me smiled in my face while holding a knife to my back. The only person in my entire world who showed an ounce of genuine loyalty was the woman who cleans my floors. He took a step closer, breaching her personal space. The heat radiating from his large frame was intoxicating. "You are beautiful, Penelope," he murmured, his gaze dropping to the soft curves of her face. Penelope's face flushed a deep, brilliant crimson. She instinctively wrapped her arms around her plump stomach, a defensive gesture born from a lifetime of being overlooked and mocked. "Please don't mock me, Mr. Costanza. I know what I look like. I'm heavy. I'm plain. I'm not the kind of woman a man like you notices." Garnett's brow furrowed in genuine anger, not at her, but at the world that had convinced her of such a lie. He reached out his large, calloused hands, gently grasping her wrists and pulling her arms away from her stomach. "Do not insult my intelligence, and do not ever insult yourself in my presence again," Garnett said fiercely, his thumbs tracing circles over the soft skin of her wrists. "I have spent my entire adult life surrounded by plastic women with starved bodies and empty, calculating souls. They are decorations. You are real. Your softness, your curves, your heart. They are the most genuine things I have touched in 10 years. He released her wrists and cupped her face, his large hands easily framing her round cheeks. His touch was shockingly tender for a man capable of such extreme violence. "You saved my life, Penelope, but more than that, you woke me up," Garnett whispered, his face inching closer to hers. "You are never going back to that estate to scrub floors. You are never wearing that uniform again, unless it's to indulge a very specific fantasy of mine." Penelope gasped, her eyes widening at the brazen, deeply possessive declaration. Her heart hammered furiously against her ribs. "Garnett," she breathed, using his first name for the very first time. "You are under my protection now," he vowed, his lips hovering mere millimeters from hers. "You are going to stand by my side, and I swear to you, anyone who ever makes you feel like you are less than a queen will answer to me directly." Before Penelope could formulate a response, Garnett closed the distance, pressing his mouth against hers. The kiss was not gentle. It was commanding, desperate, and filled with the raw, possessive heat of a man claiming what was rightfully his. Penelope melted against him, her soft, ample curves pressing flush against the hard, muscular planes of his body. Her hands moved up, tangling in the thick hair at the nape of his neck, finally anchoring herself to the most dangerous man in Chicago. Outside, the storm finally broke rain, lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse. But inside, wrapped in the arms of a MAFIA king, the wallflower had finally bloomed, completely untouchable and fiercely, irrevocably loved. What an absolutely explosive journey. Penelope proved that true strength doesn't come from holding a gun, but from having the courage to speak the truth when it matters most. From a terrified housekeeper hiding in the shadows to the fiercely protected queen of a Chicago mafia empire, her story is a testament to the power of loyalty and the undeniable draw of unexpected romance. Garnett Costanza might rule the underworld with an iron fist, but Penelope Gallagher completely conquered his guarded heart. If you loved this high-stakes, thrilling mafia romance, full of betrayal suspense and a beautifully curvy heroine claiming her power, please hit that like button, share this story with your fellow romance and drama lovers, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more intense, passionate and twist-filled audio stories every single week. Drop a comment below. What was your favorite moment between Garnett and Penelope?